Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started here to discuss accelerating the speed of digital transformation in financial services. In a moment, I'll be joined by my longtime friend, Carl Hillier from Abby. Carl, I've known for, well over a decade now. Carl's actually one of the founding fathers of the BPM movement, as well as being involved in the space around originally document processing and enterprise content management, to today being very involved in AI and in the emerging aspects of digital transformation. Carl's going to talk about that. He's going to provide some rules for how to accelerate transformation in financial services. He's going to go through some use cases, and then we're going to have an open discussion. Carl and I will talk for a little bit, and we'll invite questions. At any point, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function here. All questions will be answered whether we get to them during today's session or not. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital transformation in general. And I wanted to use a couple of metaphors to begin. So here is one of the most recognizable scenes. This is a movie about transformation itself, both the transformation of Benjamin, and really it was reflecting the transformation that we were going through in the middle of the last century, culturally as well as economically. And as part of that, Benjamin's uncle gives him advice. As a young man about to embark on his career, he leans into him and he says, just one word. You remember this. You know the scene. Just one word. Process? That's right. Process? Well, in reality, it was plastics, but plastics transformed the 20th century by ushering in what became the consumer revolution. How we could make things that we couldn't make before. We could have a mass customization on a scale that we never could before, and it ultimately transformed not just the consumer industry, but led to things that we saw in the advancing of electronics and ultimately transformed the 20th century economy. What we're seeing today, what we're going through, and we're still in the middle of an inflection point, and it is around the economic transformation in the same way that when we moved to plastics, we had that malleability, we had that control, and now we had a whole host of markets and products and opportunities that we couldn't have conceived of in the prior mode. We have that with digital. But really, when we talk about that, we typically use software to be synonymous with digital. What we really mean by that is process, and that ultimately process drives the means for delivering innovation, for creating value, for bringing new products and services to market, to seizing new opportunities in that same shift as we saw in that move from physical to digital. So another perspective on that, this is an example where we're able to look through the same lens, to see the exact same scene, but with about a decade in between, and to see that distinction. So St. Peter's Square, 2005, a crowd is assembled. They're eagerly awaiting news of the new pope. And while they're waiting, they're anticipating whether it's going to be the blue or black smoke, and they're waiting that answer. But the reason why this lens offers a great sense for the scale of the transformation that we've gone through is that in a rare occurrence that we have in our lifetime, two popes announced in very close proximity. So as we look at the scene in 2005, and then we look at the difference in 2013, today we see a pretty drastic difference. And this marks one of the most vivid illustrations of the transformation that we've gone through. 2005, certainly everybody had cell phones, everybody had cameras, everybody had the various things that we have today, but 2013, following the introduction of what was really the event that changed it, was the introduction of the iPhone in 2007, and fundamentally shifted the lens through which we look at the world, where today, literally, we're living through our screens. The scene in 2013 is identical to what my daughter's recital looked like, what the audience looked like. We view the world through the screen of our devices, and that has fundamentally changed how we think about our relationships with our customers, how we bring products to market, how our relationships with our employees, and how we interact. But where is that going? I would argue, and this is clearly the scene today as it was in 2000. Where is that scene 5 years from now? I would say that it looks closer to what's on the right. For sure, it's not going to look identical to what's on the left. Because the one thing that we know is that we can no longer predict that it's a single mode, a single medium, a single device, metaphor, or platform through which that we're going to be engaging our customers and engaging our employees. We've seen over the last 10 years a mad rush towards mobile, where digital has been almost interchangeable with mobile. When you look at a digital strategy and you think of digital transformation, it's certainly something that in most organizations, most strategies transcends just your mobile strategy. But when we think about delivery, we've been heavily focused on how quickly, particularly over the last 10 years, how quickly can we port to a mobile platform? How can we take a mobile-first approach? There's been some justification in that, and this study, which is now a couple of years old, but one that I found compelling for two reasons. So a survey of customers of banks, for those that switched their primary bank, which is very disruptive. We don't switch our banks easily or in haste. This is something that requires a fair amount of upheaval. So for those that did, they had to really have been motivated. So what was that motivation? And when this survey was first run, 6 months prior to the follow-up, less than half said that the reason why they did was for a mobile banking platform. 6 months later, it was over 60%. Basically, a close to 50% change in terms of the attitudes of customers. And this is now a couple of years old. I've been waiting for the follow-up study to this. I would say that indeed that percentage is even greater. So the good news is this was limited to owners of smartphones and tablets. The bad news is that's your customers. All of your customers are falling into this demographic, and this is trending towards a primary motivator. So clearly there's some justification in the mad rush that we've seen in the last decade towards a mobile-first strategy. The challenge is, if you have built your digital transformation strategy around mobility, you've already built legacy. That mobile-first strategy indeed is your new legacy, because it's not about the app. Again, it's about the process. Digital transformation is about the process, and the mobile strategy should be about that. It's not that people want to do banking on their phones. It's that at the moment, the phone is their go-to interface. That's where they have a relationship. They don't want to drive to the branch. They don't want to sit in front of a desktop computer. They want to have the convenience and the immediacy and the intimacy that they have with their phone. But the challenge is that relationship is at risk, because that's not one that we can count on. Clearly, we can count on it today that the majority of our customers are still interacting that way, but we're already seeing that needle shift. To look at a timeline and look at what we're undergoing now, and this is a great metaphor. When you look at the long tail to the left, over a century from the introduction of the phone to the introduction of the television, and you look at how slowly we shift to primary metaphors, then look at what's happening right now, the projection over the next less than 2 years in this picture. We hit an inflection point where we have a Cambrian explosion of digital technology and digital disruption. But what this means is the way that we're interacting with our customers is no longer wrapped around one modality. We focused on the shift from web to mobile, but it's not going to be from mobile to one single predictable thing. If there is one interface or one mode, it's around natural language. A prediction I made earlier this year was that within the next 5 years, half of your customer interactions or commercial transactions will be through an intelligent agent. If you saw the Google Duplex that was announced last week, and you saw the realism through which an intelligent agent can contact using natural language, you can see that this is probably a conservative number. Now, if you think about the combination of those two things, an agent acting on your behalf with natural language and using the same capability, being able to interact on the receiving end through natural language, you can see how natural language interaction will become a dominant platform. But the reality is, from the standpoint of the underlying technology, we can't predict what that interface is going to be when we're building our processes. So in other words, we can't build based on a known interface the way that we could with a web and having a forms mentality, or shifting that to mobile, or now we can think of that form factor and the things that we pull into that. We've got to be able to accommodate an interface that we simply can't predict in advance. And the digital transformation takeaway is that when we think of the interface, it's no longer a thing. It is now a set of things. And we have to shift the mode from thinking in terms of building our process and our interaction around a particular interface type. Why that is so important is about how, in the context of digital disruption, we're able to respond to opportunity. If you think about any business event, it has a fairly predictable decay, half-life in the value of that response to that event. Now, there's no numbers on this chart because this obviously varies from process to process, from organization to organization. But there are some immutable facts here, which are that when an event occurs, the value of your response declines over time, but not in a straight line. It happens first very quickly and then kind of flattens out. So if we think about this, the time, and this is the original thinking around this came from, how do we ascribe value to analytics, and what are the value creating parts of analytics? A lot of our attention and a lot of where automation has been focused is on automating the action as opposed to focusing on the understanding for what action to take. Now, as we look at it from this context, the loss of business value is the vertical axis. Time is the horizontal axis. So the time it takes to, in this case, and this is a fairly predictable model, and the time it takes to understand might be from a starting point similar to your time that it takes to actually implement or to take action. But if we look from the value standpoint, that changes dramatically, where the loss in value is much greater in that period of time where you're understanding what the context is versus when you take action. Now, from an automation standpoint, most of where we've been focused, again, is on that action. And to date, that's largely been that data-driven automation requires having structured data, structured information that we can fit into rules and then take that action accordingly. As we shift to this new modality of user interaction, of consumer interaction, where we cannot predict exactly the mode that our consumers are going to interact with us, we can't say that they're always going to respond to us with a structured, standardized form, or that there is going to be a consumer rep receiving a call that's able to interact in a way where we're getting that in a structured, predictable way. We've got to be able to take the context, understand the context, and decompose what our response needs to be. In other words, we need to understand how we're going to respond to that customer faster without that structured information in order to be able to realize the value of digital transformation. So Carl's actually going to talk about this in very practical terms that explain using 5 rules and going through a set of use cases. Carl, I'm going to bring you back on and hand the presentation over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nathaniel. I'm going to also, as Nathaniel did, take you a little bit further back. Back in 1986, there was a great movie made in the Star Trek series, Star Trek IV. There's a great scene in that movie when Scotty, the starship's chief engineer, having traveled backwards in time, tries to operate a 1980s era computer. The movie, made, as I said, in 1986, accurately predicted the rise of Siri, Alexa, and the widespread proliferation of voice recognition technology. But poor old Scotty, burdened with 1980s tech, picks up the mouse and, using it like a microphone, says, "Hello, computer," albeit with a Scottish-Canadian accent. As futuristic as voice recognition was back in 1986, this illustrates how we interface with technology. The rise of business process management and the more recent ascendancy of both robotic process automation and the Internet of Things are vital catalysts and enabling technologies that can drive digital transformation. For organizations to leverage these powerful tools, it's vital that they speak the right language. Moving from the analog to the digital realm requires that the unstructured information contained within business content be digitized. The digital content needs to be more than a digital facsimile, though. It should exhibit content intelligence. What I mean by that is the information needs to be structured in a way that these enabling technologies can both understand and act upon. By talking to the right language, organizations can maximize the impact of BPM, RPA, and IoT, and accelerate the speed of their digital transformation initiatives. So rule 1 is talk the right language. Make sure that the information that you extract is presented to these technologies in the most appropriate and efficient manner. So what is the right language? what we're trying to do here is liberate business data from the analog realm and make it accessible in the digital one. BPM as an application platform, and as Nathaniel said, I've been involved in BPM for well over 2 decades. BPM craves structured data. It started out as a means of simply routing documents around, but the data was still very much buried within those documents. And you could add structure by manually entering in information, but that's not really a viable option. Information must be extracted. It has to be extracted rapidly, because as you saw from Nathaniel's presentation, the speed with which we're able to process information has a direct impact on the value that we provide to our customers. The information must be obviously processed accurately so that the information that we get is a fair reflection of the information that's contained within those documents. And lastly, it needs to be done cost effectively. There's no point in automating this process if it becomes prohibitively expensive. So we're presented with all of this content, but ultimately, if you don't know what it is, you won't know what to do with it. So one of the first things that you need to do with any piece of content is understand what it is you're looking at. And I say looking at in the sense that you're not necessarily reading the document yourselves, but that any system needs to be able to recognize and classify the documents that that are undergoing processing. So, for example, if I was to take my driver's license and hold that on up against a wall, maybe 20 feet away, you could probably tell that it's a driver's license, or at the very least, some kind of ID. But at 20 feet, it's unlikely you would be able to read a single character on that driver's license. And you probably wouldn't be able to recognize if the photograph was me or not. But that's not really the point, because what you're doing there in your mind is image-based classification. You're looking for certain traits within the image that are going to help you. So the fact that there's a certain amount of text, the orientation of the document, the size of the document, the fact there's a photograph on it, all of those things are cues that will help you identify what a particular item is. If you actually read the document, then you're also doing text-based classification. So there are certain cues there too, most notably the phrase driver's license. But that could there could be a number of different things that might indicate whether something is a driver's license as opposed to a corporate ID. For example, my California driver's license, which I just renewed, has my weight and my height. And those are things that are less likely to appear on an ID, for example, that's a corporate ID. So what we're able to do is to say, well, if we look at these things from an image perspective and we extract the text from a document, that's going to give us certain information about what type of document it is. Now, we're not trying to pull out structure here. That comes later. But what this is allowing us to do is identify what the document is. And once we know what the document is, then we can actually determine what is the information, what is the structure within that document type that we're looking for. So within ABBYY, what we do within our FlexiCapture products is we both have image-based and text-based classification. They can both be used or they can be used independently. Image-based classification is obviously faster because we're not having to do any OCR on the document itself. And what happens is that the system will generate a probability that a document is of a particular type. So if we look at, say, for example, 3 types of documents, an invoice, a letter of credit, and a credit application, we can assess probabilities based on the image and based on the text contained within those documents. And then using a rules-based decision tree, we come out with a likelihood of any particular document being of a particular document type. Now, the goal here is to get to the point where we can do classification without any huge amount of development. So in the sense that we don't have to write code in order for it to recognize an invoice as an invoice, or a letter of credit is a letter of credit. And we want to be able to leverage AI to do that. So we want to be able to have trainable image-based classification for scanned documents. And I say scanned documents, these could also be documents whose provenance is already in the digital realm, so a PDF that might already exist, something that's emailed in and so on. And then we also want to have trainable content-based classification in terms of for text documents. So once we get a document OCR'd, we generate the text, we can create rules both through training and also through additional rules that we create based on certain text phrases. So, for example, the presence of the phrase driver's license or the word California will tell us that what we're looking at is a California-based driver's license. The key thing here is that this is something that isn't just done once, but is part of a continuous improvement process, meaning that when a document goes through processing, at various points, it's quite possible that a system might need to escalate that to a verification agent, somebody who's responsible for saying, okay, is this correct? And if and when they make changes or indeed validate the assessment of the system, that is fed back into the knowledge base in such a way that if a document of a particular type, and invoices are a great example here because they're going to have variable formats. Even an invoice from the same vendor may change over time, and if it does, and the system needs to be able to take advantage of that change, rather than require the whole system to be continually updated. Now, this is a movie scene that perhaps is a little less obvious. This is a scene from the movie The Big Short, and in this, about 10 minutes into Adam McKay's film about the 2008 housing crisis, Christian Bale, playing hedge fund manager Dr. Michael Burry, is spending hours in his office looking over masses of spreadsheets. And what he discovers is that many of the mortgage-backed securities that were viewed as safe investments were in fact a ticking time bomb. And he tries to explain this to his boss, played by Tracy Letts. When he does, he gets kind of a skeptical response. He basically says, it's only a matter of time before this investment basically turns to nothing. And he says, and his boss says, how do you know? How do you know they're built on such a house of cards? And aren't they? He says, makes the point. These mortgage-backed securities are filled with hundreds of mortgages. And Christian Bale's character has a simple response. He says, I read them. And his boss replies, you read them? Nobody reads them. Only the lawyers that put them together read them. And actually, even they don't read them all. In short, these mortgage bonds were made up of thousands of mortgages, many of which were very risky subprime adjustable rate mortgages. And the way that these bonds were constructed was that if 15% of them failed, the bond was ostensibly worthless. And this illustrates a very important point that we all have documents within our organization, but the value of that information is really hard to realize unless you actually read the document, because the information is burdened in the analog realm. So what we want to be able to do is understand the content by exploiting content intelligence. So having the ability to automatically extract information. So once we've established what kind of document that we're looking at, what we want to be able to do is pull out that structure, the structured information that we need. We don't want to have to read manually all of these documents, all of these thousands of mortgages or thousands of invoices. We want to be able to pull that information out. And in this particular instance, what we want to be able to do is to using examples, train the system, and then ultimately process those documents. And if some of those documents aren't able to be automatically read, we want to improve the system as needed. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's about leveraging that content intelligence to make your robots and processes smarter, So whether you're using RPA to completely automate a certain part of a process, or whether you've got a BPM system that's running a business process management environment, we want to be able to extract that structured data. So by looking at the document, we can automatically locate where the data is, not for where physically it is on the document, because documents are going to vary in their format. We want to be able to pull that information out by recognizing whether it's using AI, using a combination of other things like database lookups, interfield dependencies, document cross-referencing. So we might have a set of documents that we're processing. One might be a mortgage application or a credit card application. And on one document, someone's social security number and contact information is filled out using constrained handprint on a form. Now, we can process that, we can extract that information, but it's never going to be as accurate as looking at a document that has machine print instead of constrained handprint. So, for example, if we look at someone's tax returns, and if if like many of you, you filled out your taxes in April of this year, your tax return may have been generated automatically using something like TurboTax. So my social security number's in there, and indeed, whenever I need to, for some other purpose, need my children's social security numbers, it's not something I keep on hand. I always go back and look at my tax return because I know it's going to be there. And indeed, if I'm putting my information in a form, if I have both documents, I have someone's application form and I have a copy of their 1040 or their W-2, I'm able to say, well, you know what, I'm going to take the information that's in the W-2 or the 1040 and apply that to all the documents in the case. I don't need even to necessarily read the Social Security number that's been written or handwritten on a form because I have the other information, and that's going to be a much better provenance for me. And in our case, what we do with FlexiCapture and our BPM connector is we are able to take the forms that the documents we capture and along the structured information and pass that to the BPM system and map those document types or case folders to a particular process or object inside of the BPM system. And at the same time, take the document and place that either in the BPM system itself, because some of them have a built-in repository, or they may decide to leverage a broader-based ECM platform and then place the link along with the structured data into the BPM system so that it can be processed. This is a great quote from Wayne Gretzky. He skates to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And this is probably one of the most fundamental shifts over the last few years. Nathaniel showed that photograph of the crowds waiting the election of a new pope. And we saw that in just 8 years, there's a huge difference in the way that people were using technology. People now are using voice-activated technology. They're using their phones to broadcast live. I have family in the United Kingdom, and my son is really into track and field. I can actually broadcast live to my parents and my son's grandparents the race live. Live television was a challenge years ago in terms of showing things that were happening in one part of the world and broadcasting it to another part of the world. Now we can do that individually to an audience of one. And the key thing is we want to be where the content is. In the olden days, it was a question of the content came to us as a service provider. In the same way that people came to us in the banking fraternity. People would go to a banking branch. Now, the vast majority of people don't ever go to their bank. They interact with a mobile device. And from our standpoint here, what that means is that we want to be able to be independent of where the document is coming from. It's less likely to be an asynchronous transaction. Where someone sticks something in the mail, it arrives a day later, and then at some point, 2 or 3 days later, they get a response. People are looking to have an instant, synchronous conversation with the institutions with whom they do business. So ultimately, it's about be where the content is, being able to take content in from mobile devices, from network file shares, hot folders, ECM repositories, FTP sites, or using multifunction devices. No matter where the document comes in, the moment it is captured, we are instantly working on it, because as Nathaniel mentioned, the ability of us to react, we want to be able to process things sooner, because the sooner we are able to react, the greater the value that we can provide to our customers. So if we look at a couple of use cases here. Firstly, KYC, for those of you are familiar with this, it's about know your customer. This is a really important part of creating a response to a customer wishing to avail themselves of your services. Therefore, there's a bunch of checks that have to go on. Is this person really who they say they are? And it's important for two reasons. One, of course, is to make sure and to mitigate the risk of fraud, but also it's an opportunity for you as an institution to form an impression within the minds of your customers. How you go through that process, this is the first interaction the customer is going to have of your financial institution. And in a lot of cases with KYC, it involves documentation, whether it's a utility bill, whether it's a bank statement, whether it's a driver's license. There's all these various pieces of documentation over which you have no control, but are nevertheless important. And the ability of organizations to be able to incorporate this information and make that process as non-intrusive, as easy, and as rapid, and as cost-effective as possible. Going out to where that content resides, putting the customer in control of that transaction so that they are able to take photographs of their documents and have those documents processed and have the information extracted, not necessarily within business hours, but whether someone's last thing at night or first thing in the morning, sitting in their kitchen photographing a copy of their phone bill and sending that to the bank as part of the KYC process. The ability to do this very quickly, accurately, and cost-effectively is extremely important in bringing on board new customers. Another example, coming back to The Big Short, is the secondary mortgage market. There was an article recently on CNN that talked about the size of a mortgage file, particularly now with all of the concerns over mortgage fraud or the instability of the mortgage market. The old Wild West days of no-doc loans are pretty much in our rearview mirror, and many mortgage files can exceed over 500 pages. And in a lot of cases, these documents are not very well recorded. A lot of the time, we're seeing the fact that these documents are just simply categorized as miscellaneous. The reselling of mortgages is still very common. And if you look on your mortgage contract, there's a disclosure that lenders are required to make, which states whether your loan will be sold and the percentage of all its loans that are resold. But a lot of the times, information exists within these documents, and people have to go into them to make sure that, first of all the documents are current, that there aren't any documents that are missing, because you don't want to take on board an inadequately documented mortgage. So consequently, organizations are going to continue to purchase mortgages, but nevertheless, they have to be able to onboard them as easily and as rapidly and as accurately as a bank would onboard their customer. So it's absolutely critical for both in terms of mitigating risk, to maximizing the value that you provide to customers, and minimizing your operational expenditure, that organizations are able to extract all of this incredibly valuable information that exists in the analog realm. And the sooner organizations are able to do that, the speed with which they're able to do that, and obviously the cost, by minimizing the cost that it requires for them to do that, allows them to accelerate the speed of digital transformation. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Nathaniel.
Very good, Carl. Thank you. I'm actually going to regain. So we're now going to have a open dialogue for the few minutes here. Again, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function. And again, we'll either answer your questions here or all questions will get follow-up. I did want to go back to one of my slides, which was not this one, although the only greater source or wellspring of business maxims other than Dilbert is Gretzky. And I think that line of skating to where the puck is going, not where it's been, is one of the greatest all-time quotes. That's the quote for this. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to get across here. The value is in being able to understand where the puck is going, not simply trying to accelerate the time to get there. So how do we know where that puck is going? How do we get the context from the business event? And that's, Carl, you laid that out beautifully. So that is really the point here. Getting that understanding for how to act, not simply accelerating that action, is around extracting, gaining the content and intelligence. And you put that very well, Carl. I'd never heard it put quite that way. That's also very quotable.
I think one of the things that the graphic that you have on the screen right now really illustrates is, it's all very well being really good at what you do, but you have a certain window in terms of time that you have to decide what it is you actually have to do, and that actually, you can have someone, if someone isn't necessarily the fastest at doing what they do, but they can predict what's going to happen or come to a decision much more quickly. And I'm sure, as Wayne Gretzky came to the end of his career, he wasn't the fastest on the ice, but he was able to read what was going on, and he always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. And I think from a business perspective, that's something that organizations that are wrestling with the challenges of digital transformation is, and to your point, it's about acting sooner. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be super fast, because if you can shorten that window to making that decision, the value of your action is dramatically diminishing. And the quicker you can come to a decision, the greater the value you can provide to your customers.
Exactly. And the challenge really is not getting the information that we need. And you put it very well, that information is burdened by being in the realm of the analog. It's extracting the intelligence from the information that we have or otherwise have access to.
Yeah, and ultimately as well, you ideally want to get to the position where you can be predictive. So, a lot of what we've talked about is actually reacting to things when they happen. But I think one of the most fascinating aspects of AI is its ability to actually predict what's going to happen. And use that information. And again, the more information we have, and the smarter the systems get, the BPM systems and so forth, and predictive analytics, that it almost buys you more time, because now you're actually doing things before the event that requires you to react has even happened. And that's one of the most fascinating aspects of AI and its ability. And many BPM platforms are starting to incorporate predictive analytics, goal-orientated processes where you have a process, where you want to be, and you're automatically trying to figure out how to get there before you're even you're notified that you need to be there.
Exactly. Well put. Well, we are at 11:45, and we had said that we would stop then, but I think Carl, if you have a few minutes, why don't we try and take a couple of questions before we break?
Sure, no problem.
So I'll take the questions here going through. Here's one that is probably worth discussing. You had talked about it, so I think I can predict your answer to this, but maybe give it a little more context. Does ABBYY have a BPM product?
No. The answer to that is we do not, and that's by design. ABBYY was founded back in the 1980s, and we pride ourselves on being an industry leader in the realm of content intelligence, being able to extract information. So we work with a number of different BPM vendors, certainly some of the top vendors that you probably would instantly come to mind. I won't mention them here, but we have technology partnerships, and certainly we've announced a number of those, and there'll be more coming. We've also integrate with other information systems like ERP systems, and indeed, I think probably in RPA, we're working with probably 8 out of the top 10 vendors, and the 2 that we're not, we're probably in discussions with. This is seen as something that's extremely valuable because these information systems crave data, and the more information they have, and the sooner they have it, the more valuable the processes are to the customers. But also, it's a question of automation. If I have more and more data, then I can actually automate an awful lot more, and I can have the users of the system focus on those particular steps in the process that are more kind of knowledge-based orientated. And more and more people are spending the time and effort on the smaller percentage of cases which require a much more involved level of human oversight. And if we can get to the point where many of the transactions are fulfilled automatically, then we're going to see, we're going to satisfy that need in the market now, where people, won't put up with being told, "Thank you for your request. We'll contact you within 3 business days." They want to know. They want an answer now. If they apply for a credit card, they expect it almost instantly, a decision. And there's just no way of achieving that when you're dealing with a very manually orientated process. So the more you automate, you can make sure also by automation you can ensure a higher degree of compliance as well, because you can put hard and fast rules within those processes, but still deliver the level of responsiveness that people are coming to expect. You made a very good point. People don't change their banks very often. At least people of my generation. I still bank with the same bank that I banked with when I was at college. But now people today will change cable providers. They'll change their phone providers if they're not getting the kind of customer service. It's very difficult to differentiate on cost. But it's a proven fact that if you can deliver a high quality of service, that is a critical differentiator and will maximize your customer longevity.
That's a great point, Carl. I think that's the perfect point to end on. So why don't we conclude our event? I thank you for joining us today. Carl, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Nathaniel.